Donald Trump has made an announcement to suggest he's going to withdraw stimulus from the US economy until after the election. It was greeted with some softness in the commodities markets. Part of that doubtless brought about by a slightly stronger dollar on this announcement. But I think if we look at the charts very briefly before we go to John Meyer from SP Angel, just to illustrate this is the hourly chart for nickel. You can see when the announcement was made, the hourly candles pulling back. But since then, we have seen a rebound. Copper, for its part, saw a little bit of a gap open up, but it was only a very small downside. And then we have had this move back, and we're now, in fact, higher than where we were this time yesterday before the announcement. But just how sensitive are these metals markets to stimulus and the ongoing stimulus program that we've been seeing both on the monetary and on the fiscal side? In other words, from governments and also from central banks. John Meyer joins us now from SP Angel. John, good to talk to you. Just as a quick overview, do you see that these metals markets are becoming like a drug addict on drugs? Do you think these metals markets are becoming dependent on stimulus measures now? And if governments around the world do start to withdraw these, do you see softness for commodities?
Well, metals react mainly to real world things. They also react to sentiment, where investors are predicting what's going to happen in the future, but that's also based on where we think the demand for these metals is really going. And yes, stimulus is very important because the financial stimulus that's being injected into markets drives the construction projects of today and of the future. And that's really critically important. Now, what we're seeing at the moment is that China has been very quick to get projects up and running. It had a whole lot of projects already waiting there as part of their next 5-year plan and ongoing development of the Chinese economy and its own infrastructure. An awful lot of electric vehicle charging stations and new railways, new railroads being put into place anyway. I mean, thousands of kilometers of new rail being built right now. So they just accelerated some of what they were already planning. In the West, we're now seeing an acceleration of projects all through the lockdown. The UK government continued to push the HS2 project. It was delayed in certain areas by local mayors. For example, Sadiq Khan delayed development of certain parts of HS2 in London, and we've seen a bit of that around the rest of the world. And in the States, Donald Trump, who is all for construction and reconstruction of a lot of American infrastructure because he is fundamentally a builder, he's still pushing for stimulus, to more stimulus money to drive this construction. What he said last night was that he wanted to delay discussions with the Democrats on the next round of stimulus. It doesn't mean they're not going to do the stimulus. It just means that I think, well, the way I read it is Donald's a bit tired having come out of hospital, and he's put this on the back burner till after the election. I think it's also very political because I think it hurts the Democrat side of the argument, and it probably gains him a few more voters. And well, at the end of the day, we'll see who the Americans vote for. But I don't think there's going to be any lack of stimulus. And the copper market, which is a barometer for all this stuff, is telling us that they had a little fall on that announcement, but then it recovered and now it's at a higher level. And that's saying, well, yes, we do think the stimulus is going to come through, and we're not going to worry about what Donald Trump says in the occasional tweet or even verbally, because at the end of the day, we all know he's very much in favor of stimulus and new construction.
This is interesting, isn't it? Because this goes back to sort of Keynesian theory, the idea that you pump money into the economy from the central government and you then bleed it through into projects which will then stimulate areas of the economy. I still maintain, though, that from a pure economics point of view, this is not as good as providing real commercial reasons to grow the economy through capital expenditure and so forth from private companies. Let's take up that point you mentioned on copper, actually, because I think if we look at the daily chart here on copper, what I want to highlight on this chart here is the highs that we had back in January, something like about 63.30 or so. Then of course we had the COVID effect taking us all the way down to those 4-year lows at 43.50 or so, and then we've had this climb back. Now I think anybody would yes understand that this has really been about the fact that governments are willing to step up to the plate and are willing to inject stimulus. But I will put it to you that that's already fine for the interim. And for these individual projects, you mentioned HS2 is a really good example, especially for copper. Some of the other items where we're going to be seeing rollout of these power charging points for electric vehicles and so forth, good for copper. But in fact, until we get commercial activity really beginning to be generated, this is only a momentary thing. There's a limit to the amount of stimulus the governments can pump in. We're waiting for some sort of commercial activity, surely, aren't we, to see a continuation on the upside?
Well, as I say, the commercial activity was very quick to get going in China, and they are the world leaders in ramping up projects. But they've had so much to do because China was really a very backward economy until the 90s, and then it started to grow at an extraordinary pace. But it had to transform what was almost a medieval feudal society into something that works in the modern world. When it comes to the Western world, sure, it's a slower process. We're democratic, and it takes time for all parties to agree on these stimulus packages. And then when you look into Europe, which in many respects I still feel is slightly feudal, it takes them even longer. So we generally expect any stimulus in the European Union to be probably 9 months behind whatever the Americans do. And the Americans are probably about 6 months or maybe 9 months behind what the Chinese are doing. And the UK is a bit in between, in that we're not quite as quick as the Americans, but we're not far behind. And that's partly because our democratic processes work in a similar way. And we don't have to go through all the bureaucracy of the European Union to push that into place. And today, Boris Johnson was talking about the new 3.6 gigawatt wind farm on the Dogger Bank in the North Sea. And that's a massive offshore wind farm. And he's talking about every household in the UK getting their electricity from wind power, which is brilliant news from a stimulus perspective, because that will keep the shipyards going who are building the legs for those wind farms. It keeps the technology companies going who are doing the generators and the turbines, and the guys who do the blades for the windmills. And then of course the guys who come in and have to install those massive windmills in the offshore location. And then there's an awful lot of commodities that go in there. There's the neodymium and other rare earths in the permanent magnets for the motors. It's about 650 kilos of neodymium per installation, I think. It's an enormous amount. They're going to use, by my calculation, about 10% of annual rare earth supply or neodymium supply in that single 3.6 gigawatt wind farm installation. So it's a very big deal. Not to mention the copper cabling to connect these windmills to mainland UK and get that electricity distributed into the national grid. So yeah, there's a lot of metal to be used here, and a lot of stimulus that occurs along the way. And so money that we were spending on buying in coal or buying in gas is now being spent within the UK. It's just the right thing to do.
Some political analysts say that we are hearing quite a lot from Boris Johnson, and a lot of things have either as yet not come to pass, or indeed they are perhaps maybe off the top of reasonable expectations. Do you think it is reasonable that as a nation we can expect this? As I said, you reiterate this in your note this morning, enough electricity to power every single house in the UK by 2030. That is not very far away. Reasonable, or do you think that is just a bit of political posturing, and it's just something that he's going to try and ride on for as long as possible before being found out, in essential terminology?
It's very reasonable, but it is also political posturing. And what he doesn't say is he's not pledging to provide industry with wind power, which would be a really big thing. I mean, China recently said that they were going to go completely carbon neutral by 2060, which is a massive statement. And would be great if we could actually believe them. But of course, the guys making the pledge are not necessarily going to be around in 2060. And we know that China's record on actually sticking to what it says is not particularly good. So it would be nice to hold their feet to the fire and ensure that they are carbon neutral by then. and unfortunately there are more and more, there's more and more evidence that, shall we say, global warming is having a bit of an impact on our daily lives, unfortunately. And it'd be nice for China to stop polluting in the way that it has, even for their own sakes, because when we look at a certain amount of their industrial processes and raw materials processing that they do need to clean it up a lot. And yes, they've banned the or restricted the import of certain types of scrap material into China, and that's good for them. But they really need to clean up their act, certainly in rare earth processing, which is extremely toxic. But there are many other areas where they need to clean up as well. And as their green shield policies are, shall we say, better implemented, we should see China become a bigger importer of materials like vanadium and many other metals that they need to support their own internal growth. And of course, they need to support the industry that then exports to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Okay, look, John, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks indeed for joining us. Let's look at stimulus and the promises made by Boris Johnson to try and drive every household's electricity demand through wind by 2030. Big promises. It's just to see how things work out. That was John Meyer from SP Angel. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter at IGTV and subscribe to our YouTube channel.